Good day, students. Once again, I will be doing the review question 4.3 with you today in this video. And it's a review question 4.3. It says Lido Limited is a manufacturing concern that produces two types of products, namely tables and chairs. The raw material or the material are used in the following ratios. We have material A, wood for tables, 5 kg for plastic, and material B is wood for chair and 4 kg for plastic. Then after we are given labor requirements and rate, and it takes 10 hours of labor to complete 1 unit of a table, and it takes 15 hours of labor to complete 1 chair, and employees are paid R6.50 per hour to complete 6.50 per hour, and under chair employees are paid R7 per hour. Then below we are given the expected sales in the year 2015, and the expected sales for tables is 3,000 tables that are expected to be sold, and each table is expected to be sold at 400 Rand each, and we expect to sell 6,500 chairs, and each chair is expected to sell at 600 Rand each. And we are given the expected units of inventory both for material and the units, material kgs and the units. And the tables, we are given the opening balance, which is on the 1st of January 2015, and the closing balance on the 31st of December 2015. So now we expect that the opening stock for the 1st of January will be 800, and we expect the closing balance of the tables of the units that are completed to be 1,100. In terms of chairs, we expect that the opening balance on the 1st of January will be 1,200, and we also expect that 1,500 will be the closing inventory by the 31st of December in the year 2015. And in terms of material, because to produce the chairs and the tables, we need the material in terms of woods and plastic. So now in terms of material, we expect that there will be a raw material of 4,000 on the 1st of January 2015, and we also expect that there will be 5,500 kgs of wood of material at the end of December 2015. Then other kgs of material in terms of plastic, we expect 3,000 on the 1st of January, and we also expect that there will be 3,500 of the plastic kgs of material that are left by the 31st of December in the year 2015. Then after we are given the expected purchase price of the raw material, and the expected purchase price of the raw material is in kgs, or it is per kg, and we expect that wood will be bought, or the cost price of the wood will be 30 Rand per kg, and the cost price of the plastic will be 20 Rand per kg, and these are the expected prices of material per kg. Then after we are given manufacturing overheads are applied at the rate of 60% of direct labor cost. So now they tell us that our manufacturing overheads are applied or absorbed at the rate of 60% of direct labor cost, meaning that direct labor cost, you multiply that by 60%, you'll get manufacturing overheads that are applied or absorbed. Then we are required to calculate the number of units of tables, to be manufactured during the current or during the year ended 31st of December 2015. That means we are required to do production budget. This is production budget, where we calculate the number of units to be produced. And these units will be tables, as the question states that. So now let us go straight to the production budget. The production budget starts with the expected sales. Then this is 4.3.1. We are doing the production budget, which is the first requirement, where we calculate the unit to be manufactured in the year 2015. Then production budget start with the expected sales, always expected sales or estimated sales. And our expected sales in terms of tables, because we are required to do the production budget for the tables. And our expected sales in terms of tables is 3,000 tables that we expect to sell by the year 2015 or during the year 2015. So now our expected sales will be 3,000 units. 3,000 units. Then we have to say plus the closing stock, because closing stock would have been there until the end of the year. We add the closing stock. Then closing stock is also given the closing stock of the completed units. Closing stock of the completed units is given in terms of tables. Remember, we are dealing with tables. Closing stock will be 1,100. Production budget says expected sales plus closing stock. Then we add 1,100, which is the closing stock, plus 1,100. Then after, remember, we are doing production budget. Then the total will be 4,100, which is production required or units required. Production required or units required. These are the units that are required. Then out of the units that are required, remember, there are units that will be there or were there at the beginning of the year, which is the opening stock. Opening stock, we always have to subtract opening stock, because out of the units that we require to produce, this is what is required. But out of that 4,100, there is opening stock that come from the previous accounting period. And the opening stock that come from the previous accounting period would have been manufactured in the previous accounting period. So now we will not manufacture the opening stock. That is why opening stock must be subtracted, because it was already manufactured in the year 2014. Then it just became an opening balance. Therefore now hence we have to subtract the opening balance of the finished goods. And the opening balance of the finished goods from the given information is 800 units of inventory. So now we subtract the opening stock, because 800 was already manufactured last year, so that will not be manufactured in the current period, hence it must be deducted. Then 4,100 minus 800, that will give us the number of units that must be manufactured in the current period, which is 3,300 units. That becomes the production requirement. That is the requirement of production, or the units to be produced. Production requirement will be 3,300 units. These are the units that are required to be produced in the accounting period of 2015. So now that was the first requirement. Please take this into account, that whenever you are doing production budget, opening stock must be added. Sorry, the closing stock must be added, because closing stock is the stock that would have been produced by the current year and it was left by the end of the year. However, opening stock must be subtracted, because opening stock was produced in the previous accounting period. So you don't need to produce opening stock, because it was already manufactured and completed last year, and it became opening stock in the current accounting period, which is in this case the year 2015. Then after, you'll definitely get to your correct production requirement, which is the units that are required to be produced in the year 2015. So now let us go to the second requirement and see what are we required to do. So the first requirement is complete and done. And the second requirement, we are required to calculate the kilograms of wood. That means we are dealing with the kgs here. The kilograms of wood, which is the raw material that will have to be purchased. That means we will be doing the material usage budget for the year ended 31st of December 2015 if 8,500 units of chairs are manufactured. So now in this case, they say assume that production requirement is 8,500. So now this is production requirement, because whenever you do material budget, you have to start with the production requirement, and production requirement come from the production budget. But since the production budget for the chairs was not done, therefore now they gave us the 8,500 of the production budget. Therefore now we'll have to use that 8.5 as the production budget or production requirement, as it is given that we must assume that 8,500 units of shares are manufactured. Then that is the production requirement where the raw material budget starts. So now that will be 4.3.2 that we have to answer now. Then we go to 4.3.2 where we do material usage budget. Material usage budget, where we have to calculate the material that will be used. Then material usage budget, and this budget starts with production requirement. Production requirement. And we are already told, or we are already given, that we must assume 8.5 as our production requirement. And since we are calculating the material budget, so now we have to multiply by the kgs of material per unit. We are dealing with the material, and the material it can either be in kgs or in liters or in meters or in grams. But in this case, our material kgs per unit are given to be in kgs, because these are the kgs that we're dealing with. And we had two types of material A and material B. And material A had woods of tables, and that was 5 kgs for plastic, and these 5 kgs are per unit. And material B was also wood for chairs, and 4 kgs for plastic. And remember, we are required to calculate material usage for chairs under the assumption that 8,500 chairs were manufactured. Remember, it said assume that 8.5 chairs. So now we are doing chairs, meaning that we have to take the kgs of material per unit in the second material that we have, which is material B. Therefore now we have to multiply by the 4 kgs of material that is required per unit. And those 4 kgs of material we multiply so that we get the total material required. Then we multiply by material kgs per unit, and our material kgs per unit is 4 kgs. Material kgs per unit is 4 kgs. Let us confirm that. Yes, it is 4 kgs of material per unit, because we are doing chairs, not tables. Then we multiply by the kgs of material that are needed per unit so that we get to the total material requirement. Then we get to the total material requirement, and that will be 8,500. We multiply that by 4, and it will give us 34,000 kgs of material that are needed to manufacture 8,500 units of chairs. Then this will give us total material required, and this is the total material that is required for usage. So now we need to know, remember, how much material will be purchased. So now this is the total material that is required for purchases, but we also have to take into account the opening balances and the closing balances. And let us go and check once again. We have to say plus closing balance of material, that we must not forget, plus closing balance of material, because the material that would have been left by the end of the year is the material that would have been purchased during the year, plus our closing balance or our closing stock of material. Remember, we are referring to material now, the raw material that we are referring to. And when it comes to raw material, there were opening and the closing balances of raw material. And remember, we are busy with the wood, not the plastic, because the question was very, very specific. It was very, very, very clear that we must calculate the kilograms of wood, So now when we take the opening balance, we take the opening balance of wood and we take the closing balance of wood. Here we have the wood in kgs. Opening balance is 4,000 and the closing balance is 5,500. Remember, closing balance must always be added and opening balance must always be subtracted. So now we have to say plus closing balance of 5,500 plus 5,500, which is the closing balance. Therefore, now after we have added that will give us material. This was not total but material required. Then this will be total material required, and that will be 34,000 plus 5,500 plus 5,500, and this will give us 39,500 rands, which is the total material that is required. However, out of the total material that is required, there is material that will be from the previous accounting period, which is the year 2015. So now the material that come from the previous accounting period was already purchased. So now we don't need to purchase something that we already have in the business. So that is why we have to say minus opening balance, because opening balance was already purchased last year and we don't need to buy the opening balance. Then we have to say less opening balance or less opening stock, and our opening stock is 4,000 units. So now let us go and confirm that our opening stock was 4,000. Here we have our opening stock as 4,000. Opening stock of wood is 4,000 and it was there on the 1st of January 2015, meaning this 4,000 is the material that was left in the 2014 accounting period. By 31st of December 2014, this was the closing balance and it became an opening balance on the 1st of January in the year 2015. So now we don't have to buy material that come from the previous accounting period because it was already purchased. That is why we have to always subtract the opening balance of material. And if you remember, as we did from the production budget, we did something very similar to what I'm busy with now. The closing balance was added. This was added, which was the closing balance, because closing balance will have been units that were produced in the current period and they were left at the end of the year. It means they were produced in the current accounting period. However, when it comes to the closing stock we subtracted. Why did you say less closing stock? Is because why did you say subtract to the opening stock? Because the opening stock came from the previous accounting period. and last year this number of units were already manufactured, and if they were manufactured, we don't need to manufacture them again. That is why we say out of the units that are required to be manufactured, we must subtract the units that were already manufactured in the previous accounting period. Hence, we also subtracted the opening stock. Please take into account that when it comes to these budgets, opening stock is always deducted, or it is always subtracted. And it is for the reason that it comes from the previous accounting period, which was already taken into account. So now that means our material purchase budget, which is the material that we need to purchase, will be a total material purchase or material purchases, which is the material that we will purchase in the current period after we have excluded the material that was purchased last accounting period. Then the material purchase budget will be 39,500 minus 4,000 kgs that were there from last accounting period. Then this will be 35,500 kgs. So now this is the material that will have to be purchased in the current period. Therefore, now we have completed this budget. Then we can go to the next required budget that we must complete. So now let us continue and check the next budget. The next budget or the next requirement is 4.3.3, and 4.3.3 requires us that we must calculate the labor expense budget for the year ended 31st of December 2008 if 8,500 units, if 8,500 units of chairs, that means we are doing labor cost budget if 8,500 chairs are to be manufactured. So now once again they say assume that 8,500 is production requirements. Assume that 8.5 is production requirement. So now if they say we must assume that this is production requirement, it simply means that 8,500 is production requirement, because labor expense budget always start with the production requirement. Therefore now we do 4.3.3. We do 4.3.3 where we are doing the labor budget. And our labor budget start from the production requirement. Which is the number of units that are required to be produced. And the number of units that are required to be produced is given to us as 8,500 rands. There is 8,500 rands. These are the required units to be manufactured or to be produced. The required units to manufacture 8.5 chairs. Then since we are dealing with the labor budget, remember labor budget, we are speaking of the employees here, labor. And we know that labor has to do with the number of labor hours. So now it means in this case we have to multiply by the number of labor hours it takes to complete 1 unit. Then we have to multiply by the number of hours it takes to complete 1 unit. We multiply by labor hours per unit. And our labor hours per unit, it is also given. Let us check how many hours does it take to complete 1 chair, because we are doing chair. This is where we are. How many hours does it take to complete 1 chair? And we are given the number of hours and also the rates. And they told us that it takes 10 hours to complete 1 table. But we are not doing the budget for the table. We are doing the labor budget for the chairs. And it is given that it takes 15 hours of labor to complete 1 unit. So now we have to multiply by the number of labor hours, which is 15 labor hours to complete 1 unit of a chair. Therefore now that will give us the total labor hours to produce 8,500 chairs. We multiply by 15 hours. This is the number of hours it takes to complete 1 unit. After we multiply, that will give us the total of the labor hours that are required to manufacture 8,500 units. Then this will be 127,500 hours. 127,500 hours. And these are hours, which is total labor hours. Total labor hours. And these are labor hours that are required to manufacture 8,500 units. And since we are looking for the labor budget, which is the cost or labor expense, we have to multiply by the rate to which employees are paid per hour. We have to multiply by the rate to which employees are paid per hour. Multiply by labor rate per hour. And our labor rate per hour is also given to us. We multiply by labor rate per hour, and our labor rate per hour to manufacture a chair is given as 7 rand per hour. This is the 7 rand per hour, the rate to which employees are paid per hour. And there is 127,500 hours of labor that are required or needed to manufacture the 8,500 units. So if we multiply by 7 rand, this will give us total labor cost. Then this will give us total labor cost. Multiply this by 7, it will give us 892,500. 892,500. This will be total labor cost. Then this will be total labor cost or total labor budget. Total labor cost or total labor budget. So now we expect that this is the total cost that will be paid to employees when they manufacture 8,500 units and and it takes 15 hours to complete 1 unit, and these employees are paid 7 rand, then that will be a total of 892,500 that the company will have to pay in terms of direct or in terms of labor cost. And that was 4.3.3. And it was the last requirement based on this question, which was requirement 4.3.3. There is no other or further requirement in this question. Now, just to emphasize the importance and the link between these budgets, or just to emphasize few things that we have to take into consideration. When it comes to the material budget, don't forget that we always have to start with the production requirement. And this is the production requirement that was given. But because we are doing material, we have then, after we said production requirement, we have to multiply by material kgs per unit. Material kgs per unit. So that we get to the material required, which is the 34,000. After we get to this level, you have to add the closing stock. Always add the closing stock to get the total material required of 39,500. Then after, we have to subtract the opening stock, because the opening stock of this material was already purchased in the last accounting period, which was up to the 31st of December 2014. But now it was an opening balance in the year 2015. Therefore, now we don't need to buy the material that was already there. We already have this material. That is why we have to subtract this material, which is the opening balance or the opening stock of the raw material. Then after, we'll get to the material purchases, which is the kgs of material that are required to be purchased in the current accounting period. And that will be the end of the material usage budget. Is very important budget to take into account. And when it comes to the labor budget, because we are dealing with the labors, we have to take that into account. It's labor, it has to do with the labors, and labors will have to take into account the labor hours. However, this budget also starts with the production requirement, which is given to be 8,500 in this exercise. Then after we have done that, we have to multiply by the number of hours it takes to complete 1 unit. And we have seen that it takes 15 hours to complete 1 chair. They told us that it takes 15 hours to complete 1 chair, and this was also given to us in the information. There we are given the 15 hours per unit. There it says per unit. That means it takes 15 hours to complete 1 chair. Then we have to multiply by the number of hours it takes to complete 1 unit, which is 15 hours. Then after, this will give us the total labor hours. That means we need 127,500 hours in order to manufacture 8,500 units. So now, if this is the total number of hours that employees will work, remember, employees are getting paid a rate per hour, and there is a rate that will always be given to you, or you'll have to calculate based on the given information. And for this exercise, we knew that employees are getting paid 7 rand per hour whenever they manufacture a chair, because in this requirement we're required to do the labor budget in the case where a chair is being manufactured. In this case, 8.5 chairs are required to be produced. So now that is why we have to multiply by the 7 rand per hour, because now we already know how many hours do we need to produce the 8,500 units. Then we multiply by 7 rand per hour. Then that will give us the total labor cost to be budgeted in order to manufacture the 8,500 units. And with that being said, I thank you. I hope you have enjoyed this video. God bless you. Bye-bye.